श्रीशैलेशदयापात्रं धीभक्त्यादिगुणार्णवम् यतीन्द्रप्रवणं वन्दे रम्यजामातरं मुनिं लक्ष्मीनाथसमारम्भां नाथयामुनमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम् यो नित्यमच्युतपदाम्बुजयुग्मरुग्मा व्यामोहतस्तदितराणि तृणाय मेने अस्मद्गुरोर्भगवतोऽस्य दयैकसिन्धोः रामानुजस्य चरणौ शरणं प्रपद्ये माता पिता युवतयस्तनया विभूतिः सर्वं यदेव नियमेन मदन्वयानाम् आद्यस्य न कुलपतेर्वकुलाभिरामम् श्रीमत्तदङ्घ्रियुगलं प्रणमामि मूर्ध्ना भूतं शरश्च महताह्वयभट्टनाथ श्रीभक्तिसारकुलशेखरयोगिवाहान् भक्ताङ्घ्रिरेणुपरकालयतीन्द्रमिश्रान् श्रीमत्पराङ्कुशमुनिं प्रणतोऽस्मि नित्यम् लोकगुरुं गुरुभिः सह पूर्वैः पूरकुलोत्तमदासमुदारम् श्रीनगपत्यभिरामवरेशौ दीप्रशयानगुरुञ्च भजेऽहम् लोकाचार्याय गुरवे कृष्णपादस्य सूनवे संसारभोगिसन्दष्ट जीवजीवातवे नमः। लोकाचार्यकृपापात्रं कौण्डिन्यकुलभूषणं समस्तात्मगुणावासं वन्दे कूरकुलोत्तमम्। नमः श्रीशैलनाथाय कुन्तीनकरजन्मने प्रसादलब्धपरमप्राप्य कैङ्कर्यशालिने लोकाचार्यपदाम्भोज राजहंसायितान्तरम् ज्ञानवैराग्यजलधिं वन्दे सौम्यवरं गुरुं श्रीजिह्वावधीशदासम् अमलम् अशेषशास्त्रविधं सुन्दरवरगुरु करुणाकन्दलित ज्ञानमन्दिरं कलये पुरुषकारवैभवञ्च साधनस्य गौरवं तदधिकारिकृत्यम् अस्य सद्गुरूपसेवनं हरिदयामहैतुकीं गुरोरुपायतां च यो वचनभूषणे वदज्जगद्गुरुं तमाश्रये। साङ्गकिल द्रविडसंस्कृतरूपवेदसारार्थ संग्रह महारसवाक्यजातं सर्वज्ञलोकगुरुनिर्मितम् आर्यभोग्यं वन्दे सदा वचनभूषणदिव्यशास्त्रम् अकण्ठोत्कण्ठवैकुण्ठप्रियाणां कण्ठभूषणां गुरुणा जगतामुक्तं व्याप्तं வசனபூஷணம். பேரு தருவிக்கும் அவள் தன் பெருமை ஆறு பெறுவான் முறை அவன் கூறு குருவைப் பனுவல் கொள்வதிலையாகிய குளிர்ந்தவருள் தான் மாறில் புகழ் நற்குருவின் வன்மையோடெல்லாம் வசனபூடணமதில் தேரிட நமக்கருள் முடும்ப இரவன் கழல்கள் சேரன் மனனே. திருமாமகள் தன் சீரருளேத்தமும் திருமால் திருவடி சேர்வழி நன்மையும் அவ்வழியொழிந்தனவனைத்தின் புன்மையும் மெய்வழி ஊன்னியமிக்கோர் பெருமையும் ஆரணம் வல்லவர் அமரு நன்னெறியையும் நாரணன் தாழ் தரு நற்குரு நீதியும் சோதிவானருள் தூயமா குருவின் பாதமாமலர் பணிபவர் தன்மையும் தீதில் வானவர் தேவன் உயிர்களை ஏது விண்ணி எடுக்கும் படியையும் மன்னிய இன்பமும் ஆகதியும் குரு என்ன நிலை பெறும் இன்பொருள் தன்னையும் அசவிலா வேதம் அதனுள் அனைத்தையும் வசனபூடணம் வழியால் அருளியா மறையவர் சிகாமணி வண்டுகள் முடும்பை இறையவனெங்கோன் ஏர் உலகாரியன் தேன்மலர்ச்சேவடி சிந்த செய்பவர் மாநிலத்தின்பம் எய்தி வாழ்பவரே. லோகாச்சார்ய கிருதே லோகஹிதே வசனபூஷணே தத்வார்த்ததர்ஷினோ லோகே तन्निष्ठाश्च सुदुर्लभाः जगताचार्यरचिते श्रीमद्वचनभूषणे तत्त्वज्ञानञ्च तन्निष्ठां देहि नाथ यतीन्द्रमे.
Asmad Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmad Parama Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmad Sarva Gurubhyo Namaha. So welcome. We are continuing our discussion of Sri Vacana Bhusanam by Pillai Lokacharya with the commentary of Manamala Mahamunigal. And I believe this is part 5 or part 5. We're starting from the 26th Sutra or Churnika.
Srimate Ramanujaya Namaha, Srimad Varavaramune Namaha, Ullalokacharya Tiruvadile Sharanam. Sri Vacana Bhusanam. Previously it was told that Prapatti does not have preconditions of place, of time, of situation or method, or of the person doing it, or the fruit sought. Next, in Sutras 26 and 27, Ullalokacharya explains why there are no conditions of place and time. The example used for that is Vibhishana's surrender to Sri Rama at the seashore. Sutram number 26. Sa esha deshaha kalaha enkayale idarku desa kala niyamam illai. In this sutram, the words Sa esha deshaha kalaha are Hanuman's. When he is explaining to Sri Rama and others that Vibhishana should be accepted in that place and in that time only. When Vibhishana came to Sri Rama and sought to surrender to him in the seashore, there was opposition to him amongst the monkeys and the bears. Baddha, Vairacha, Papacha, Rakshasa Indra Vibhishanaha, Adesha Kale Sampraptaha, Sarvata Shankyatam Ayam is the Valmiki Ramayanam slokam. In this, Sugriva and Jambavan tell Rama that Vibhishana has come from the sinful Ravana, but that he has also come at the wrong place and at the wrong time. Adesha Kale, that can be seen as Adesha Akale, the wrong place and at the wrong time. But Hanuman rejects this argument and says that this is the place and this is the time. Sa yesha deshaha kala. Hanuman says that Vibhishana has determined correctly in his mind that this is the place and this is the time by looking at Ravana's lowly qualities and, O Rama, your superiority and you being the Purushottama. He says, so it is appropriate that he came now and here, yuktam hi, that this is indeed befitting, and it matches to his knowledge. Sadrisham tasya buddhitaha. It is worthy of his judgment. Why is it appropriate and why does it match to his judgment? Manavada Mahamunigal explains. Ravana is full of tamogunam and tortures everyone, whereas Rama is full of sattvaguna and he protects everyone. If Vibhishana does not leave Ravana at this time, he will be assisting Ravana in all his bad deeds. But if he is with you, O Rama, who does only dharma, he would have gained service at your divine feet. Ravana is evil and doing acts that makes Perumal's divine heart feel hurt. Whereas Rama is Purushottama who can destroy evildoers effortlessly. It is for these reasons that it is appropriate and matches to the knowledge of those who follow dharma. So Hanuman says, no one can fault the place and time when Vibhishana came to perform surrender. Since this is being determined by Siriya Tiruvadi Hanuman, who knows the Sharanagati Dharma, it shows that there are no conditions for place or for time for doing prapatti. In the next sutram, Ullalokacharya says, Ivvartam mantra ratnatil pradama padatil suspashtam. Ivvartam means the fact that prapatti has no preconditions of place and time. Mantra ratnam is the Dvaya Maha Mantra. Pradama padam is the first word, Srimad, in the first part of Dvayam. Suspashtam says that it is very clearly shown there. So let us see how that is explained by Manavada Mahamunigal. So in this sutram, Ullalokacharya says that this, that is the fact that prapatti has no conditions for place and time, can be seen in Dvayam whose expression is the actual act of Prapatti. Dvayam is known as Mantra Ratnam because 1. It is the essence of all Upanishads. 2. It is available to everyone. 3. It acts very fast. And 4. It is very dear to Perumal. Dvayena Mantra Ratnena is the Pramana. To show the greatness of the mantram, Pullalokacharya uses the word Mantra Ratnam instead of Dvayam in the sutra. In that Dvayam Mahamantram, the first part is Srimat, which shows the eternal being togetherness of Tayar and Perumal. The Matup Shabdam, following the Shri, says that they are always together. But what is the purpose of them being together always? Because if at any time or at any place, a Chetana, a person, gets that desire to reach Perumal, that desire can disappear in that moment itself due to the instability of the mind. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna himself says, Chanchalam hi manaha. The mind is very unstable. It's very unsteady. The same is expressed by Thirumangai Alvar in his Periya Tirumozhi Pasaram, Nindrava Nilla Nenjai Udaye. So to make it easy for the Chetana to reach Perumal, at the very moment when the desire appears, Tayar is eternally in his company. And that is what is expressed through the word Srimat in Dvayam. Because if the Chetana appears or desires to go to Perumal, and if Tayar is not there to do Purushakaram, then it may not work. And if the Chetana has to go to another place to get to Perumal, by the time he gets there, his mind might have changed. And if he still manages to get there, if Tayar is not there, again the Purushakaram is not going to work. So, at the moment when the desire appears, in that place itself, he should be able to seek Perumal. And he needs the Purushakaram of Tayar for that, and so she has to be always with him. So through this, it is seen that there is no condition for what place or at what time that someone has to perform Prapatti. Next, Pullalokacharya talks about the condition of a situation or a method and whether that is needed for Prapatti. Sutram number 28, he says, Prakara niyati illai ennavidam engum kanalam. He says, the fact that there is no precondition of situation or method is shown, and it is shown to the fact that it is seen with everyone. And he explains that further in the next sutra. Sutram number 29, Draupadi Snatayay andre prapatti pannitru Arjunan Nichar Naduveyire Ivartam Kettat. So what was said in the previous sutra is now being explained with two examples. In Mahabharatam Sabha Parvam, Dushasana drags Draupadi to the Rajasabha to humiliate her in front of everyone. And when he does that, she tells him, Rajasvalaika Vastraham Natumam Netumarasi. That is, she is menstruating at that time and wearing a single garment, and she says that she is not qualified to be in the presence of teachers and the elders in the Rajasabha. But he does not listen, and he drags her there and attempts to disrobe her. At that point, she performs Prapatti to Krishna saying, Raksha Mam Sharanagatam. This shows that a person does not have to have taken a bath, does not have to be in a pure state, etc. to perform Prapatti. This is the first part of the sutram that says, Draupadi Snatayay andre Prapatti Pannitru. Even in that condition she was in, she performed Prapatti. The next part talks about Arjuna hearing about Prapatti in front of the people with lowly qualities, the Nichas. Arjunan Nichar Naduveyire Ivartam Kettat. Who are Nichas? Thirumangai Alvar in Periya Tirumozhi says, those who don't think of him, who don't have bhakti to him are Nichas. Nedantagayai Ninayada Nichar Tame. The Pramanam Vishnu Bhakti Vihinastu Yatischa Shvapachatamha says that those who don't have bhakti to Vishnu, even if they are sannyasis, even if they are yatis, are lower than the lowest caste. Srimad Bhagavatam says that those who don't have bhakti to Vishnu, even if they are Brahmins, are lower than the lower caste person who has bhakti to Perumal. Viprat, Vishat, Gunayudhat, Aravinda Nabha, Padaravinda Vimukhat Shvapacham Marishtam. This is expressed by Tondaradipudiyar also in his Tirumali Pasaram. Padudila Urgalathu Palasadu Perimargal Yigulattavargalelum Em Madiyargalagil Turuminir Kodumin Konmin என்று நின்னோடும் மொக்க வழிபட அருளினாய் போல் மதில் திருவரங்கத்தானே. And these are the people that are gathered in the war against Arjuna. They are opposed to Krishna. They see Krishna and Arjuna's side and they are still gathered against Arjuna. That shows that they have no faith or they lack bhakti to Krishna. Not only that, they had humiliated and tortured Draupadi even after she had performed prapati to Krishna and right in front of them. And they saw that Krishna had actually helped her. In spite of that, they continued to torture her. And now they have gathered against the Pandavas again when they know the Pandavas all have surrendered to Krishna. Matbhaktan Shrotriyo Nindan Satyaha Chandalatam Vrajet. In this, Perumal says, if a person abuses my devotees, even if he is a Brahmin, he immediately attains the nature of a Chandala. And such people who have shown the quality of Chandalas have gathered together here. And it is in this assembly that Arjuna heard about Prapati from Krishna. By saying Nichar Naduve, it is shown that Arjuna has become impure by being in their presence. And that Prapati itself is being told amongst them by Krishna. Therefore, in this sutram it is shown that there are no preconditions that a person has to be in a pure state or that they should not be amongst lowly people when performing or hearing about Prapati. Sutra number 30. Agayal Suddhi Asuddhigal Irandum Teda Venda Irundapadiye Adhikariya Mittane. From these two examples, it is shown that in both the time of hearing about Prapati and in performing it, a person does not have to gain purity or impurity. In whatever state they are in, pure or impure, a person is qualified for it. That is, an impure person does not have to become pure first, and a pure person does not have to become impure first. Agayal, Suddhi, Asuddhigal, Irandum, Teda Venda. The first part is clear to us. That an impure person, should they be looking for, gaining purity before performing Prapati? That question is obvious to us. But why does Pilla Lokacharya say that we should not search for impurity? Because in both the above examples, it is shown that an impure person heard and performed Prapati. So he says no one should start thinking that being impure has become the qualification now. He says there are no qualifications here. Pure or impure, you do not have to go try to gain a qualification. Irundabadiye adhikariya mittanai. In whatever state they are in, they are qualified. Alvar Embirumana Jiya Tiruvadigalai Sharanam Adiyen Madura Kavidasa.
ஆழ்வார் திருவடிகளே சரணம், எம்பெருமானார் திருவடிகளே சரணம், பிள்ளை லோகாச்சாரியர் திருவடிகளே சரணம், ஜீயர் திருவடிகளே சரணம். Sri Vacana Bhusanam, 31st Sutram. In the previous Sutram, Pillai Lokacharya has taught us that a person who is performing surrender, he or she can surrender as they are. If they are in a pure state, they do not need to go and then earn some impurity, thinking that one has to be like Arjuna or one has to be like Draupadi in the not perfect state to surrender. And if one is in an impure state, there is no need for somebody to go and earn purity. As they are, they can surrender. That is what Pillai Lokacharya taught us in the previous Sutram. This Sutram solidifies that meaning for us using an example from Ramayana. Let us see what this Sutram is and the Vyakyanam for this Sutram by Manavala Mamunigal. Ivvidathile Velvetti Pillaikku Pillai Aruli Cheda Varthayai Smarippadu. In this place, one should remember the advice that was given by Nambillai to Velvetti Pillai. Velvetti Pillai was a Sri Vaisnava who was a Shishya of Swami Nambillai. Nambillai, of course, was the original Lokacharya. And then he had a Shishya called Vadakku Trivedi Pillai who named his son after his Acharya, and hence we have Pillai Lokacharya who gave us Sri Vacana Bhusanam. So Nambillai is a very senior Acharya. Velveti Pillai was his Sishya. And he asked a question to Nambillai. And the question had to do with an incident in Ramayana. In Sri Ramayana, we read and we understand that when Rama wanted to cross the ocean, at that time Vibhishana had just come and surrendered to him, and Rama had accepted him. And then in a private place with just Vibhishana and a few others, Rama will ask what is the advice to cross the ocean. And Vibhishana will suggest that Rama should surrender to Samudra Raja, to the king of the ocean, because the ocean originally was dug up by Sagara, who was an ancestor of Rama. If Rama surrenders to the Samudra Raja, he will remember that his ancestor was the one who originally dug up the ocean, and he will help Rama. He will give some advice to Rama as to how the ocean could be crossed. And Ramayana says that Rama, after listening to that advice, he will go to the banks of the ocean, and then he will face the east direction, and then he will do an Anjali, a Namaskar, Namaste, an Anjali to worship the Samudra Raja. And after that he lies down there for 3 days on a grass mat. The Samudra Raja does not come, and after that Rama becomes angry, and then he uses some weapons. He threatens to even use Brahmastra against the Samudra Raja. After that he comes out, and then the history continues. But in this specific case, the question that Velveti Pillai had was, in Sri Ramayana it says Anjalim Prangmukha Kritva, facing the east direction with folded hands, Rama worshipped the Samudra Raja, is said. So given that Rama followed a specific procedure here, Velveti Pillai asked the question, Rama followed a procedure while doing surrender. So does this mean that to surrender there are some methods and procedures to be followed? For that, Nambillai provides the answer. He says the method and procedure adopted by Rama to surrender to Samudra Raja is not something that is required by this surrender. Rama, out of his own mindset, because he is seeking help from Samudra Raja, he out of his own mindset, he followed a procedure to face the east direction and fold his hands and then surrender to Samudra Raja. But this is not something that is a requirement or that is a prescription for surrender. Now, one thing to keep in mind for us here is Rama, in Rama Avatara, we know that Rama thought of himself like a human being, as a man, and he conducted himself as a man. And hence Vibhishana had suggested to surrender to the Samudra Raja, that Rama did. Nambillai, he also talks a little bit more. He says, look, when Vibhishana came and surrendered to Rama, he did not follow any procedure. He did not take a bath in the ocean. He did not do a specific method to surrender to Rama, and he was accepted. So here, the fact that Rama followed a specific method is because of Rama's own mindset and Rama's swabhava. And of course, Rama was a great king in the Ikshvaku dynasty. Because of that, he is used to following certain procedures, he is used to following certain methods, and he followed those methods to surrender. Vibhishana, being a Rakshasa, did not know any of these methods. He is not used to any of these methods. He directly came and surrendered to Rama without any specific procedure. The method adopted here is the method that is known to each one. It is not a property of surrender. It is not prescribed by surrender. Hence, Manavalama Muni says, for somebody who has some qualifications, there is no need for that person to go out of the way and earn some disqualification or earn some methods and procedure that he may not know. Similarly, for somebody who does not have any qualification, there is no need for that person to go and earn any qualification, they can just directly surrender as they are. So here, this sutra, this strengthens the concept that to surrender, one can surrender as they are. Now the next sutra answers a question. We know that doing karma like Jyotishtoma or other karmas, to do that, it requires some qualifications. Adhikari niyamam. Somebody who has to do that needs to have certain qualifications. But we also learnt previously that surrender does not have, prapatti does not have those kinds of qualifications. Why is that? Or how is it? Is the question that is being asked, which is answered in this sutram. The sutram is sutram number 32. Adhikari niyama mannike orindapadi ennennil Dharmaputradigalum, Draupadiyum, Kakamum, Kaliyanum, Sri Gajendra Alvanum, Sri Vibhishana Alvanum, Perumalum, Ilaya Perumanum, Tudakkamanavargal, Sharanam Pugurugayale, Adhikari Niyamamillai. The sutra says, yes, there is no specific qualification that the person who is doing surrender should be of this type or should be of this community. Because, and the sutram lists a whole list of people who have done surrender. And they are very, very varied. And hence, the sutra says there is no necessity to be of a specific type or a specific background to do surrender. Let us see the Vyakyanam and let us see who all are quoted in this sutram as having done surrender. First, Dharmaputradigal. It is Yudhishthira and his brothers. The Pandavas surrendered to Krishna. They were kings. They were Kshatriyas and they were kings and they were very learned. Draupadi is a woman and she surrendered. Kakam is a bird, a crow. And this is not just any ordinary crow, but a crow that actually hid its original form. And this crow also did a really unimaginable sin on Mother Lakshmi, on Sita. It surrendered. In Krishnavatara, we learned that Kaliya, the snake, surrendered to Krishna. So a snake has surrendered to Krishna. Sri Gajendra Alvan, Gajendra the elephant, every one of us knows the story. It also surrendered. It's an elephant that surrendered. Here beautifully, it is not mentioned as Gajendra. It is mentioned as Sri Gajendra Alvan. Alvan it's mentioned and Sri Gajendra Alvan. Why is that? Because Gajendra, it was trying to take the lotus from the pond in order to do service to Lord Sriman Narayana when the crocodile caught it. So it was doing service, it was doing kainkaryam when it was interrupted. And hence, it is referred to by the very honorific title, the honorary title, Sri Gajendra Alvan. In fact, the Purana says, Satu Nagavara Shriman. It uses the word Shriman, somebody who is very rich in kainkaryam, rich in service to Lord Sriman Narayana. So elephant also surrendered. Vibhishana Alvan. Sri Vibhishana Alvan also surrendered. He was a Rakshasa and he surrendered. Perumal, here Rama himself surrendered. He was a great king who was a Dharmavan and he was the right follower of every Dharma. He surrendered. Ilaya Perumal, Lakshmana surrendered to Rama. We saw earlier on in the presence of Sita, while they were about to go to the forest, Lakshmana held Rama's feet and then he requested that he also wants to go with him. Like this, there are many other people, the Sutram says, and Manavala Mamanigal quotes many other people. For example, he quotes Muchukunda, he quotes Indra and other Devas who have surrendered to Lord Sriman Narayana, Kshatrabandhu, the entire Vanarasena, the monkeys, right, the monkey army that surrendered to Rama, like that. So given that these wide variety of people, not just people, different yonis, different bodies, like animals, right? We saw snakes, we saw monkeys, we saw elephant, like that. All kinds of living beings have surrendered, and hence it is clear that there is no qualification required that a person has to be of this type, born in a certain community, or should have these qualifications in order to surrender. That is this sutra. In the next sutra, then the next question comes. Sutram says, Phala niyama mannike urindapadi ennennil Dharmaputradihalukku phalam rajyam, Draupadikku phalam vastram, Kakattukkum Kaliyanukkum phalam pranam, Sri Gajendra Alvanukku phalam kainkaryam, Sri Vibhishana Alvanukku phalam Ramaprapti, Perumalukku phalam Samudra Taranam, இளைய பெருமாளுக்கு பலம் ராமானுவிருத்தி. So the same question like previous sutra is asked here. Why is it that, how do we know that there is no prescription with respect to the fruit for which surrender can be done? And again, the same procedure is followed, where people who have surrendered for all kinds of fruits are quoted here to denote to us that there is no specific restriction on the fruit that one should have in mind to do surrender. And let us see what Pillai Lokacharya has quoted here and what Manavalama Muni says. Dharmaputradikalukku palam rajyam. The fruit that Yudhishthira and others wanted was the kingdom back. Draupadikku palam vastram. We know that Draupadi did surrender while Dushasana was trying to take the saree away. At that time, she surrendered to Krishna, and Krishna, of course, saved her. So for her, the fruit was vastram. She wanted to make sure that there was enough clothing that covered her. Kakatukkum Kaliyanakkum palam pranam. For both Kakasura and for Kaliya, the snake, Kakasura the crow and Kaliya the snake, the fruit that they desired was for Lord Sriman Narayana, of course for Krishna and Rama, to spare their lives. For Sri Gajendra Advan, Gajendra, the fruit that he desired was to resume his service. Because he was in the process of doing service which was interrupted, he surrendered to Lord Sriman Narayana after a long time, and the Lord saved Gajendra. We know that from the history. And we need to understand that the phalam, the fruit that Gajendra Advan wanted, was Kainkaryam, to do service to Lord Sriman Narayana. For Vibhishana, the phalam, the fruit is Rama Prapti, attaining Rama. That is why he did surrender. For Rama, the phalam that he had in mind when he surrendered to Samudra Raja was to figure out some way to bridge the ocean or dam the ocean or to cross the ocean. For Lakshmana, the phalam basically was Ramanuvritti. He wanted to follow Rama to the forest and do service to Rama. So in this sutra, we've seen examples of very different types of people who have surrendered for different types of fruits. And hence, it is to be understood clearly that surrender does not prescribe that surrender has to be done only for this fruit or that fruit. It can be anything that one desires, they can surrender to the right person. That is the summary of this sutra. So today, we saw two beautiful meanings in addition to what we saw yesterday. One is different examples were given to imbibe in us the understanding that to do surrender, the person who wants to do surrender need not have any qualifications or need not be of a certain type or does not need to be born in a certain community or things like that. And we also saw in the last sutram that we saw today that there is no prescription that surrender has to be done only for this type of fruit or that type of fruit, by quoting examples where different types of living beings surrendered for different fruits. ஆழ்வாரம் பெருமானார் ஜீயர் திருவடிகளே சரணம்.
We are now up to Sutra 34, coming up to Sutra 34. So the elaboration of the previous sutras that we just had was about that there is no qualification necessary, and it was elaborated with different examples for doing property or surrendering to the Lord. And now the next sutras are going to explain about the only thing which is important in property is surrendering to the right person, and that is Sriman Narayana. So are there any questions or comments about those, or should we just go on?
So Swami, so would you say then, since that there's absolutely no ritual or any way or any method for doing surrender as was described there, that Samashrayanam or Pancha Samskaram has nothing really to actually do with surrender? It just probably teaches surrender, but that's not actually surrender.
It's not that Pancha Samskaram, it's not that the rituals have nothing to do with surrender. As we saw, the example was given of Rama surrendering to Varuna, the god of the ocean. So Rama was very qualified. He understood all the rituals. He understood that he had to face east. He understood that he had to had to make a pranam mudra. He understood that he had to lie down on kusha grass and do those things. So he understood that all those things were rituals that were considered necessary in the Shastras for doing a ritual surrender to Varuna. So what he did was he did those things because he knew about those things. So if we know about the formalities, if we know about the formalities of property, if we know that there are certain formalities, then we can perform them. It's not wrong to perform formalities for doing property, to do a formal property, to do a formal pancha samskara, or in the case of Deshika Sampradaya, Paranyasam, in a formal way. It's not wrong. But it's not necessary. So the idea is, to answer your question, right, is formal property necessary? No, formal property is not necessary. But if you know formal property, if you want to perform formal property, it's also not wrong. So most people, they do perform formal property. Nowadays, most people who know about property, they know about Pancha Samskara, they know about the Samashrinam, and in the case of Desu Sampradaya, the Bharanyasam. So because they know about that and they've been taught about that and they understand that, they do it. So, for instance, there are different forms of property. There's a Swanishta property, there's Uktinishta property, and there's a Charyanishta property, right? So the Swanishta property is the person knows how to do property and he does it. Either simply by mental surrender to the Lord, Tavasmi, thinking, as in Ramacharma Sloka, thinking that we are his, I am yours, saying I am yours. Or by going through some ritual that he also knows. There's some formalities, Pancha Samskara, Tapa Pundratato Nama Mantra Yagasta Panchamaha, as stated in Pancharatra. So that is Swanishta, if somebody knows all these things. Or if he doesn't know, then he goes to the Acharya. The Acharya knows how to help him to do these formalities. Or the Acharya may skip some formalities also. The Acharya may say, okay, for you, no formalities. Or maybe you're not able to accept some of the formalities. Sometimes the Acharyas, the branding of the symbols of Vishnu, they do it very lightly on the ladies or the children, or they may, some of them are doing it only with a flower or something, or doing it with in the case of what Bhaktivinoda Thakur, when he described Pancha Samskara, it couldn't be done with tilak or something like that. So the Acharya can also change the formalities. He can there may be not the right time, not the right circumstance formally for doing the formalities of property, but if somebody wants to do it, then the Acharya can sort of change the things. Because why? Because there's no prerequisite for it. It's not that the Acharya whimsically is changing a formality of Pancha Samskara, but he is adapting it to the circumstance, to the people, to the place, to the time. He can adapt it. Because why? Because there is no the only thing which is necessary is that, as Rama says, just that mentality that I am yours. So, but the other formalities, if somebody wants to do it with all the nyasas, with all the, with all the wearing all of the ritual clothing, and at the particular time, I said to my acharyas, look, I want to do my formal property. I want to do it on this particular day at this particular time because that is most auspicious according to the Shastras. And they said, okay, yeah, all right, that's good. If you want to do it like that, that's nice, So if you know those things, that's Swanishta property. You can also tell the acharya. In my case, I tell the acharya, I'd like to do it like this. I'd like this to be the way it's done because this is the way it's in the Shastra. So they agree. Otherwise, Ukti Nishta property, you go to the Acharya and say, I don't know, you do it. And I just, will surrender and you'll plead on my behalf to the Lord and that he accepts me. And the same thing with Acharya Nishta. You don't even know, you're not even sure about surrendering to the Lord, but you just have ultimate faith in the Acharya Abhimanyu. You have so much faith in the Acharya that the Acharya is going to take care of everything. So you don't even bother about thinking about surrendering to the Lord. Just, I have faith in this Acharya, and this Acharya is going to save me. So these are all forms of property. They're all forms of property, and they're not wrong. Because they're different forms doesn't mean that they're wrong. Just like all these different examples given about Draupadi, Vibhishana, Kaliya, Gajendra, Kakasura, all these different people and animals even that did property. They did it in a different way. It doesn't mean it's wrong because they did it to Srimad Narayana. That's the main thing. Because you do it to God and God alone, then it's successful like that. So again, getting back to it, the formalities, there are formalities. There are some formalities given in scripture for doing Panchasamskar, for doing Samashrayanam property, and we can follow those things. We don't have to give up those things. If we want to follow those things, we can follow those things. If we don't want to follow those things, we can still do property, and the property can be successful without those things, because property doesn't depend upon those things.
Srimate Ramanujaya Namaha, Srimad Varavaramune Namaha, Pillalokacharya Tiruvadigalai Sharanam. Sri Vacana Bhusanam. Coming up to this point, it has been shown and explained by Pillalokacharya with examples that prapatti does not have any preconditions of place or of time or of the method of doing it or of the person doing prapatti or the fruit that is sought by the person doing it. But there was one condition mentioned before, which is who that prapatti is done to. In Sutram number 24, Pillalokacharya had told, Prapatti Vishaya Niyamame Ulladu. That is explained next in Sutram number 34 by Pillalokacharya. The Sutram is, Vishaya Niyamam Avadu, Gunapurti Ulla Idame Vishayamagai, Purti Ulladam Archavataratile. What is this Vishaya Niyamam? We all know that he has 5 forms. Param, Vyuham, Vibhavam, Antaryamitvam and Achai. Param is this form of Paravasudeva, the form he takes in Sri Vaikuntham, listening to the Samaganam and surrounded by Nityatmas and Muktatmas. Vyuham is the form he takes of lying on the serpent bed Adisesha in the Milky Ocean, listening to the pleas of Brahma and the Devas and Rishis. Vibhavam is the form he takes when he descends to the different worlds. As Krishna himself says, Paritranaya sadhunam, vinasaya dushkritam, dharma samsthapanarthaya sambhavami yugege. Antaryamitvam is the form in which he is present inside everything. Alvar says, Udal misai uirana karandengum paranduran. And Achai is the form he takes when he is present in Dividesams, temples, holy kshetras and so on. So which of these forms that we should do prapatti to? And Pillalokacharya says that it is a form in which qualities such as easy accessibility, which is saulabhyam, and similar qualities are complete. That is gunapurti. It is this form that we should do prapatti. Vishaya niyamam avadu gunapurti ullayadame. So the next question is, in which of these 5 forms can we see such completeness? And Pillalokacharya answers next by saying, it can be seen in the Archavataram. Purti Ulladam Archavataratire. In Padma Samhitai, Perumal himself says that even he who knows everything naturally cannot fully explain the completeness and qualities in the Archa form. Archavatara Vishaye Mayap Yuttechataha Tatha Ukta Gunana Shakyanne Vaktum Varsha Shatairapi. He says, I have only said the qualities of Archa in compact form. In 100 years, even I cannot explain it fully. Next, Pillalokacharya shows how the Alvars perform prapatti primarily in Archavatar. Sutram number 35. ஆழ்வார்கள் பல இடங்களிலும் பிரபத்தி பண்ணிற்றும் அர்ச்சாவதாரத்திலே. Alvars are those who have been given the flawless knowledge by Perumal himself. Mayavara Madina. With that knowledge, they can very easily see all his 5 forms. We are able to see only his Archa form. Great yogis can sense his Antaryami form and so on. But Alvars can see all 5 states. But when they had the great drive to attain what they sought, the twarai that they have, which is the inner drive, to get the unbroken service to him. Amarva says, Urivil Kalamellam Udanai Manni Varivila Adime Seyya Vendum. And when that drive was there, they did that prapati mainly in Divyadesams, with the Archa form of the Lord. They do prapati with the other forms also, but only in a few places. The majority of it is being done in Divyadesams. Some examples are, Namarvar saying, Aranakku nin padame sharanagat tandurindai, Kadalgalavaye sharanagak konda, Namperumaan adimel semam kol, Unnadikki amarந்து புகுந்தேன் and so on. All of that is done with the Archavataram. Thirumangai Alvar 2 says, Vandun Tiruvadiye அடைந்தே நைமிசாரண்யத்துள்ளந்தாய். Talking about the Naimisaranyam, Divyadesam. Virayar Thiruvengalava Nayen Vandadaindeni. He talks about Tirumala. Kavalambadi meye kannane kalagan niye. Thirukavalambaadi Divyadesam. Aalivanna nin adiyine adainden anipozhil Thiruvarangathammane. Talking about Srirangam. Thus the Alvars do the prapati mainly in the Divyadesams, which is the Archavataram. Why did Alvars do prapati mainly with the Archavataram? Is the question. And in the next sutram, Pillalokachar answers that by saying, Purnam engayale ella gunangalum pushkalangal. Pushkalam means complete. So he says, ella gunangalum pushkalangal. All qualities are complete. And how do we know that? He says, Purnam engayale. The Vedas say it. So wherever Alvars do prapati so far, like we said before, all 5 states are available to them. But they do it in Archavataram mainly due to the completeness in the qualities in the Archavataram. And that is said by the Upanishad, Ghatavalli Upanishad, which says, Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Avashishyate Sarvam Purnam Sahum. What this tells us is that the Vibhava avatars originate from the Vyuha avataram, and they are full of qualities. And they are the cause of the Archavataras, which are complete in all divine auspicious qualities. Where Pillalokacharya says, Yella Gunangal, he means that when a Chaitana seeks him as being the Upaya, that means, along with the accessibility, which is Saulabhyam, other qualities such as Vatsalyam, Swamitvam, Saushilyam, etc. are also needed. And then to do what the Chaitana wants, he has qualities such as Jnanam, Shakti, Prapti, Bhuti, etc. And this sutram says that all these qualities are complete in the Archa form. But how can we say that Archa form is superior to Paratvam? And that's why Alvars did prapati there. Pillalokacharya explains that in the next sutram, sutram number 37. Prapattikku apekshitangal aana saulabhyadigal iruttarayil velakku pole prakasippadu inge. The greatness of Paratvam is seen through the Pramanam Vasudevosi Purnaha. That is, he who is Vasudeva is complete in all qualities. Being that, how can we say that Archa form is superior to Paratvam form? When the Chaitana seeks him as the Upayam, as the means, he is in need of his qualities such as Saulabhyam, which is accessibility, Vatsalyam, which is complete mercy, such that he won't be angered by our sins. Saushilyam is act of mixing with everyone without looking at their inferiority. So we don't move away from him seeing his greatness. Swamitvam, that he will do things for us, etc. All of these are shown in the Agalagillen Pasaram of Swami Nammarvar. And these qualities are there in Paratvam also. But the place where he is in that form is Sri Vaikuntha, which is the place where Nityasuris and Muktatmas were all similar to him in form and many qualities. There, these qualities are like a lamp that's lit on a very bright day. And it cannot be seen, it's not that visible. Whereas in the Archa form, he is present here, in this world where samsaris like us are present too. Alvar calls this place as Irul Tarumanyam. Here, these qualities shine like a lamp lit in a dark room. So, Pulalokacharya says that the qualities that are needed for prapatti such as Shaulabhyam and other such qualities shine like a lamp lit in a dark place here. In fact, it is shown by Alvar that to enjoy these very qualities, those in Paramapadam actually come down here. When he says, Nigaril Amarar Munikkanangal Viruvum Thiruvenkadathani. In the next sutram, Pulalokacharya explains the greatness of Archai even more. Sutram number 38. Purtiyayum Swatantrathayum Kulaitthuk Kondu Thannai Anadarikkiravargalai Thanadarittu Nirkkira Idam. Perumal is the one who gets everything he desires on his own. Avapta Samasta Kaman. This is known as Purti. To suppress that is to become one who is satisfied with what someone else gives. Swatantriyam is to have his form, nature, etc. under his control. To suppress that is to take the form, the name, etc. that is devotee's wish for it. Alvar says, Tamarugandadi Yavvuruvam Avvuruvam Thane, Tamarugandadi Yeppir Mattappir, Tamarugandi Yabbannam Sindittu Imayadiruppare Avvannam Ariyana. And he suppresses both the Purti and the Swatantriyam by leaving the Paratva form and staying amongst the samsaris in the Archa form and becoming dependent on them. Vishwaksena Samhita says that he eats per the desire of his devotees. He takes his bath, he drinks water, etc. all in the same way. He's actually supremely independent, Sarva Swatantra. Yet acts like he is dependent. He's all powerful, Sarva Shaktan, yet acts like he has no power. Parasara Bhattar in Sriranga Rajastvam says that he's Archaka Paradhina. That in this form, he depends on the Archakas for everything. This is not done to him by somebody else. Because no one can do this to him. He has done this to himself. That's why Pulalokacharya says, Purtiyayam Swatantriyatim Kulaitthuk Kondu. Thane Kulaitthuk Kondu. He has done this to himself. And yet what happens is, when he shows his simplicity and accessibility like this, instead of becoming devoted to him for exhibiting such qualities, the samsaris like us ignore and disregard him based on that very simplicity and accessibility itself. That's why Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Avajananti Mam Mudha Manushim Tanumashritam Parambhavam Ajananto Mamabhuta Maheshwaram. But even though they neglect him, he is not able to let them go and he does everything for them. That's what Pulalokacharya says by saying, Thannai Anadarikkiravargalai Thanadarittu Nirkkirena. This is the greatness of Archa form. Manavara gives a couple of extra points here. That in this sutram we can say that the suppression of Purti and Swatantriyam stands for the quality of Saulabhyam. And his act of supporting even those who reject him shows his Swamitvam and Vatsalyam. Or we can also say that both of them show the quality of Saulabhyam alone. Alvar Embirumana Jiya Thiruvileshanam Adiye Madhura Kavidas.
Okay, so did anybody have any questions or comments about those? Now he's just explaining the greatness of the Archavatar form of the Lord and the accessibility of the Lord and how the Lord gives up. It doesn't really give up, but he, in a sense, he gives up his swatantram, his independence, and his to be accessible to the devotees in this world. He gives up his independence and his because he has to come here, he's basically dependent upon us to perform worship in the house or in the temple to him in his iconic form, in his Archavatar form. So he does that in order to give us accessibility to him so that we can very easily surrender unto him. So next we're going to hear about the different forms, these 5 forms of the Lord, Karnika Vyuha, Vibhava, Antayam, and Archa, which are described in the Pancharatra Agama, and we're going to hear about the difficulties or not of accessibility to these. Something he also mentioned just a little bit, that the yogis can see within their hearts the Paramatma, but normal people, we don't see the Paramatma in our hearts because we don't do mystic yoga, or we're not trained to do that. But the Alvars, of course, the great devotees of the Lord, they can see all the 5 forms of the Lord. But most general people, it shouldn't just be for the yogis or for the great acharyas and Alvars that property should be possible. It should be possible for everybody. As was just mentioned, there's no qualifications to surrender to the Lord. So therefore, if there's no qualifications to surrender to the Lord has to make that easy. Because the only one thing, which is the qualification, is you have to surrender to him. The person to surrender to is the qualification. There's no other qualification. So if the person to surrender to is the qualification, then the person to surrender to has to be accessible. Otherwise, property is not possible. So property is universal. It's universally acceptable and possible. Therefore, he must be ultimately very accessible. So he's accessible in his Archa avatar. Like even the Gaudiya Sampradaya, they might say he's accessible by chanting his holy name. You know, so he has these different ways of being accessible to us in this material world, so that we can easily surrender unto him. So that's the meaning of the sutras up to here.
I find it very interesting how he describes the Vyuha as the form which lies in the Milky Ocean. So that's something new I've learned, whereas I always thought of Vasudeva, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha, which must be expansions of that form, or is it that form which lying in the ocean is Vasudeva, and then from him goes forth Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha?
Okay, so not to get it, we're going to have in Sutra 39, we're going to talk a little bit more about Pancharatra and the 5 forms of God and how they emanate from one another, but basically in that order, Karnika Vyuha, Vibhava, Antayaman, and Archa. So if we work backwards, the soul within the body is the Paramatman, and the Paramatman apparently is expanding from I'm sorry, the Archa Avatar. The Archa Avatar is expanding from the Paramatman, because when we do Pranapratishta, we tend to do the Pranapratishta of the deity from the Atman, from the Paramatman, excuse me, in the heart, into the deity, expanding into the deity. So from the deity, the Paramatman, from the Paramatman is an expansion of Chiradakshai Vishnu, or one of the Vishnu, one of the these what do they call avatars? It's on the tip of my tongue, but I can't remember it. Okay, so the Karnika Vyuha, Vibhava, the Vibhava, all the Vibhava incarnations, like Matsya Kurma, Varaha, Narasimha, Rama, Krishna. Okay, so this is what we make the deities to look like, right? When we look in the Pancharatra Shastra and Shilpa Shastra, it says you have to, if you want a deity of Matsya, you have to make a fish. It has to look like a fish. And if you make Rama, he has to have a bow, and he has to have a, so all these things are coming from the Vibhava, right? The Archa has to come from the Antayaman, but also then from the Vibhava. And the Vibhava comes from the Chiradaksha Vishnu. As we read in Harivamsa, Lord Vishnu says, I will take birth as Rama, I will take birth as Krishna. He says to Yogamaya, you take birth from Yasoda, and I'll take birth from Devaki. We'll be swapped after birth. So it's very clear that Vishnu says that to them. It explains about how he emanates, how he expands. So the expansion of the Vibhava avatars is from the Vyuha avatars. So the Vyuha avatars, okay, there's Vasudeva, Sankarsana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha. Vasudeva more or less means, some people have this concept of 2 Vyuha systems. There's a Vyuha, another Vyuha. But anyway, Vasudeva, Paravasudeva. I'm just going to mute you, Premananda. The Paravasudeva as showing all the 6 qualities of Bhagavan in full. And then Pradyumna, Sankarsana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha showing 2 qualities each, but actually having 6 qualities, but mainly showing 2 qualities each. The expansion from Paravasudeva, you get these avatars of Karanakshay Vishnu or Mahavishnu, Kshirodakshay Vishnu, who is in the Garbhodakshay Vishnu, and then Kshirodakshay Vishnu. So these 3 Purusha avatars, 3 Purusha avatars. And so these are all considered part of the concept of Chaturvyuha, because they're expansions. They're actually Sriman Narayana, the expansions of Sriman Narayana. And then the Vibhava avatars come at a certain time in a certain place, but the other avatars are there at all times in all places, basically, because the universe is eternal. So either in Shrishti or either in Shrishti, Sthiti, or Pralaya, either in creation, maintenance, and destruction, those other forms are also there. So exactly the system, we have to look in Pancharatra to understand the exact system of manifestation from Paravasudeva, the original personality of Godhead, through the different Karnika Vyuha, Vibhava, then Antaryamin and Archa. To understand the exact system of emanation of the different forms of God, we have to look in Pancharatra. So I'm not prepared to do a class or just explaining all of that, but I think everybody understands that there are these 5 forms of God. As well as these 5 forms of God, which are considered eternal forms of God and full forms of God, there's also a material form of God, which is the universe and the souls. Right? The panentheism means that we believe that God is actually the totality of everything. That his body and mind are like the souls in the universe. And even then, there's a material form of God, there are material forms of God, like the Shishimara or the Krishna showed his universal form, his Virat Rupa. The Virat Rupa is a material form of God, so it can be destroyed because matter is destroyed at the end of Pralaya. So it's not eternal. So there are also some non-eternal forms of God. But the eternal forms of God are what are being spoken of here. So we could have a whole discussion about the eternal forms of God, the non-eternal forms of God, the different forms of God, how they emanate. But it's beyond the scope of this class right now to do that. And normally, if you're reading Sri Vacana Bhusanam, you should have already studied this. That's the point. This Shastra is not here as a basic Shastra. It's here as a very deep Shastra, and therefore it's assumed that people who are reading this understand these things about Karnika Vyuha, Vibhava, Antaryamin, Archa, and the relationship between between eternal and non-eternal forms of God and all these sort of things. So, but we can do that. We can discuss it from Pancharatra, and what the different Shastras say about the different forms of God. The important point given here is not the different forms of God, but just to single out that one form of Archavatar as being most accessible for doing property. So we're singling out, the point here is property universal? Is surrender to the Lord universal? Is easy to perform? Yes, it is. And the reason that it is because God is most accessible to us. And different sects will say how he's most accessible to us. The Sri Vaishnavas consider the deity form to be most accessible. And even like I said, the Gaudiyas, the name of the Lord is also very accessible. Remember that when Draupadi did her Sharanagati, when she was being disrobed in the assembly, it was the name of God that saved her. Krishna was in Dwarka. Krishna was on the planet, and he was in Dwarka. So he didn't personally come and give her cloth, but it was Govinda Pundarikaksham Rakshamam Sananitam. Govinda, the name Govinda, was actually the nama or the name of God which saved her. So that's why sometimes people say the name of God is greater than God himself. And this is why the Alwars praise the deities in the 108 Divya Deshams, because they're most accessible. Why is the deity considered more greater than the Lord in Vaikuntha? Because the Lord's in Vaikuntha, we can't access Vaikuntha right now. But we can get up and we can go to the temple, or we can go to our deity room in our house, our puja room, and we can easily have accessibility to the Lord. We can easily access him, and also just by chanting the names of God, by chanting the holy names of God. So these are really easy ways to connect with God. And we need to connect with God if we want to do yoga. Yoga means to connect with God. And property is the ultimate form of yoga, or surrender to God. So property is universal and it's easily accessible. And therefore, the easiest way to do property is by using these. If somebody wants to do property to the Paramatma, then he has to go do mystic yoga. And he has to do this type of meditation where he realizes the Paramatma. That may take him lifetimes. That may take him a long time to realize the Paramatma. First, he has to realize the Atma. Then he has to realize the Paramatma is there. He has to see that they're separate. Then he has that realization. That can take a long time. Whereas we can go to the temple, they open the curtains, and there's God. Or we chant his name, and he's there in the sound vibration. So these are really easy, accessible ways to do property, because property is supposed to be easy. It's not supposed to be difficult. So there are other more difficult systems, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. If you want to follow those, you can. But we're specifically in Sri Vacana Bhusanam, we're trying to emphasize the system of property and explain how it is easy and how it can be performed. So why would we really go into discussing all the difficult ways? We could, in order to give us more confidence that the easy way is better, right? We could discuss all the difficult ways too, and we could discuss all the inaccessible forms of God too. And that will give us. So that's what he's going to do in the next sutra. He's going to talk about the different forms of God, and he's going to make an analogy to. He's going to make an analogy, the different 5 forms of God, to different forms of water that are available to us, because we all need water. Water is what we need to live. So we all need water. We need access to water. So what's the most accessible water is the analogy which is going to come in the next sutra. So next time we can talk in more detail about this. And if we want to go separately and have a discussion about the forms of God according to Pancharatra and how they emanate, then we can do that also. Okay?
வாழி உலகாசிரியன் வாழியவன் மன்னுகுலம் வாழி முடும்ப என்னும் மாநகரம் வாழி மனம் சூழ்ந்த பேரின்ப மல்கு மிகு நல்லார் இனம் சூழ்ந்திருக்கும் இருப்பு வாழி திருவாய் மொழிப்பிள்ளை மாதகவால் வாழும் மணவாள மாமுனிவன் வாழியவன் மாறன் திருவாய் மொழிப்பொருளை மாநிலத்தோர் தேரும்படி உரைக்கும் சீர் செய்ய தாமரைத்தாளின வாழியே சேலவாழி திருநாபி வாழியே துய்ய மார்பும் புரிநூலும் வாழியே சுந்தரத் திருத்தோளினை வாழியே கையுமேந்திய முக்கோலும் வாழியே கருண பொங்கிய கண்ணின வாழியே பொய்யிலாத மணவாள மாமுனி புந்தி வாழி புகழ்வாழி வாழியே அடியார்கள் வாழ அரங்கநகர் வாழ சடகோபன் தண்டமிழ் நூல் வாழ கடல் சூழ்ந்த மண்ணுலகம் வாழ மணவாள மாமுனியே இன்னுமொரு நூத்தாண்டிரும் ஸ்ரீமதே ரம்யஜா மாத்ரு முனீந்திராய மகாத்மனே ஸ்ரீரங்கவாசினே பூயாத் நித்யஸ்ரீர் நித்யமங்களம்.